So like I said, my name's Kristen Fletcher. I'm the Programs and Community Engagement Manager at the Haley Public Library, and it is my pleasure to introduce Kathryn Zupsic. Kathryn has been an art educator for over 25 years, working as a docent and lecturer at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, the DeYoung Museum, and the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. She specializes in modern art from Frida Kahlo to pop art to the fine art of the tattoo, which if you missed that talk about Ed Hardy, that is on our website, and that's something to watch too. Even if you think you have no interest in tattoos, you will find yourself interested in tattoos after this talk. So Kathryn is a native of Portland. She has a degree in Spanish and Latin American literature from the University of Oregon, and she's quite fluent in Spanish. And she has a diploma from La Varenne, a renowned cooking school in Paris. So we all hope that she invites us over for dinner one night. She and her husband divide their time between Ketchum and a farm they have in Glens Ferry, Idaho. So without further ado, let me join me in welcoming Kathryn Zupsic. Thanks, Kathryn.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here again, and I'm so delighted to see some of the same faces as for the Frida talk. So tonight is a different kind of talk. Frida Kahlo was quite different from her husband, Diego Rivera, who was one of the big men of the 20th century, big in stature, big in his artistic accomplishment, and big in his appetites for food, and especially for women. So tonight I'm going to talk about him. We'll look at his art. I'm going to tell you the story of his life. And we'll talk about why he is still considered to be, by many, to be the greatest muralist there has ever been, and one of the most famous artists ever in Mexico. So he grew up in the central Mexican colonial town of Guanajuato, which some of you might have been there. It is still one of the most, it's an old silver mining town and one of the most beautiful towns in Mexico. This is what it looks like now, and this is what it looked like when he lived there. He was born in 1886, and his parents were of the middle class. They were both, his father was a school teacher, his mother was a midwife who was college trained. And he actually was a twin. Can you guess which one is Diego? You can really tell, can't you? He was a twin, but his twin died of diphtheria when he was only 14 months old. So Diego was raised as an only child, and he was really precocious from an early age. Here he is at age 4 when he learned how to read when he was 4 years old. He loved taking things apart and putting them back together. He had just boundless curiosity in that way. And he loved to draw, and he was drawing all over the house on all the walls and things, so his father set aside a room for him just to draw on the walls. So these were kind of like his first murals. So when he was 6, the family moved to Mexico City. And he wanted to go to art school from the time he was really young. When he was 10 years old, he started begging to go to art school. And when he was 12 years old, he was a child prodigy in art. He did this when he was 12 with a pencil. And when he was 12, he actually got into the San Carlos Academy of Art in Mexico City, that was the oldest art school in all of the Americas, and very prestigious. And you had to be about 18 to get into the school, but he was so big and so talented. He looked much older than he was, and they let him in. So you can see, here he is back here, and then here's a little close-up. So he's 16 here, and he's trying to look, very formal with his hand in his coat. This was a very conservative art school. They were copying the European masters. So this is, let's see, what's the date here? We're talking about the real early 1900s. So no Impressionism, none of the things that were going on in Europe, just old masters. And the main thing they did was copy these plaster heads, which, you know, is something people had been doing in art school for centuries, so just so very conservative. No interest whatsoever in anything that was Mexican art. The beloved artist was Ang, who's right here, his masterpiece. So very realistic, detailed art, and they were obsessed with everything French, the powers that be in Mexico City. So they loved Ang because he was French. There were French restaurants that the wealthy went to in Mexico City. They all had French furniture, French art. They had French governesses, and they send their children to school in Paris if they could afford it. Mexico City, has anybody been to Mexico City? It is designed after Paris. So with this main boulevard, the Boulevard de la Reforma, Place de la Reforma is modeled after the Champs-Élysées in Paris with big, it's beautiful, you know, big turnaround roundabouts with enormous statues in them, just exactly like France. He did, however, there were a few artists in Mexico who were painting Mexico. A very few. And he was attracted to that. He made this painting when he was a senior at that school. And you can already see his ability with color. This is really a lovely painting that he's captured this scene outside on a farm. And he's got those beautiful warm colors in the background and then the cools in the back. Just wonderful. And we are going to see this over and over, how good Diego Rivera is with color. So here's a portrait he did when he was 20 years old, just when he got a scholarship to go to Spain and study art there. So he was 6 feet tall, 300 pounds. He got on that boat, he went over to Europe, and he would stay there for 15 years, studying first in Spain and then in Paris. So these are a couple of the paintings he did in the 2 years that he was in Spain. You can see it's still that old master style, isn't it? Nothing even slightly modern about this, but they're very good. The one on the left is a self-portrait, which is really wonderful, the way his face is completely in shadow. It looks kind of mysterious. And then on the right, this is a Spanish picador, so from the bullfights. And again, you can see how classic old master style that is. Well, when he went to Paris, Picasso was there. And Picasso had, as you know, had just completely shaken up the art world with Cubism. Cubism, of course, he was trying to come up with a new way, a completely new way to go even beyond Impressionism in modernism and make art in a new way. So let's see, what have I got here? So if you compare it to what Diego Rivera was doing, Picasso, of course, is constructing the figure completely out of little squares, and then there's some 3D cubes back here as well. The reason this was such a big deal in the history of art is that for 500 years, ever since the Renaissance, the whole point of painting was to make a painting look real, like this one. And so, you know, the artist knew all the tricks. You made him look real by making him look 3D, by using light and shadow. You figured out how to make that room in the back look, you know, like it's going back there a ways. But Picasso had thrown all of this out the window. And with Picasso, following Picasso, came European modernism, which just, you know, so now this is the high art of Europe, is modernism, where it's very hard to understand, to look at and understand. It was kind of elitist in that way. Only people who would study art could understand this art. There's not much that is recognizable to us. One of the main art critics of the time called this the dehumanization of art, because there is nothing about our real recognizable world in it. So Diego actually became a huge proponent of Cubism. He made 300 Cubist paintings while he was there, and these are big. Like this painting is the size of this screen. They were really big, like a lot of Picasso's. And you can see he was good. Picasso even thought he was good. Picasso even stole a few ideas from him. But you can see the difference. Diego Rivera has this sense of color. He's using much more vibrant color in his. He said that he actually got to go to, the first time he got to go to Picasso's studio, he said, I was so nervous, it was as if I was a religious Christian going to meet our Lord Jesus Christ. So while Picasso was there, all the books you read about him say that he got married, but this was actually his common law wife, Angelina Belov, who was a Russian artist, and they were together for 11 years. They had a child together, little Diego Rivera, but he died at 18 months of that Spanish flu that was so deadly in Europe. And he treated her terribly, as he did most women. He said, she gave me, the years we were together, she gave me everything good that a woman can give to a man, and I returned that with all the heartache I could possibly pile on to her. When he would finally leave Europe, he would leave her behind and never get in touch with her again. No contact at all. And he would also leave behind a baby, a child that he had had with another woman, with no contact either. She actually went on to become a big person in the theater in London. I've forgotten her name, but. So here they are together. I love this picture. Of course, they were poor bohemians in Paris, and so this is Diego in a turban. This is a costume party. And this is Angelina back here in the mask. So Diego, after 15 years, he decided to go back to Mexico. But what had happened while he was gone was the Mexican Revolution. He was gone for the entire 10 years of the revolution, which happened because Porfirio Diaz had been president of Mexico for 31 years, and he had favored this tiny elite group of wealthy Mexicans and foreigners, mostly Americans and some British and French. And most of the people in the country were extremely poor, 85% illiteracy in Mexico, which he just completely ignored. Only French culture, again, only European culture had any validity at all in Mexico during these times. So the people in the countryside were so poor, they rose up and formed armies and started this war. There's fantastic, I have a book of these fantastic vintage pictures, photos of the Mexican Revolution. These are government troops. These are the rebel troops. They're just really poor people. Fighters from the south, from the state of Oaxaca. And after 10 years, the rebels won. Presidente Obregón established himself in the seat of power, and he got in touch with Diego Rivera in Europe and told him that they wanted to do this big mural program. They needed artists to come to Mexico to make murals after the revolution. But Diego didn't know anything about, these had to be frescoes. You know what that fresco technique is? It means that you put wet plaster on the wall and you paint water-based paints into it while it's still wet. That's so simplified. But the color fuses with the plaster and you have a permanent, it's in the wall. So you can't make a mistake. If you made a mistake, you'd have to flick it off and then completely replaster and start over. So nobody knew how to do this technique in Paris or anywhere or in Spain. So he went to Italy to take a look at frescoes. He fell in love with the work of Giotto, who happens to be in my top 3 favorite artists of all time, who had done frescoes in 1306. I mean, we're going back so far, the very beginning of the Renaissance, in the Arena Chapel in Padua, Italy. So almost nobody could read when he was making these frescoes either. So these are Bible stories that people who can't read can understand. Going around the wall. This theme is actually the life of Jesus's parents and the life of Jesus as well. And he tells them so well. I mean, this is coming out of the medieval art period where everybody's just stiff and expressionless, and what he did was just astonishing. This is the scene where Jesus has been taken off the cross. He's dead. And Mary, this is Mary in the blue, holding him, is looking into his face with absolute disbelief. It's one of the most touching paintings in all of art. Here, let's come close, look up close at her. The expression on her face. This is Mary Magdalene. She's always in red in art, holding Jesus's feet, also so sad and in disbelief. And then he gives us just the tiniest bit of scenery, you know, like you would do if it were a little play, just that one little hill, minimal. It's not part of the story, but it sets the scene for us. And then this little tree up here in the top. Back here, I'm telling you these things because Diego is going to lift them. He's going to lift these ideas. Back here, he's got this little crowd of people, and you really just see the ones that are in front. Behind them are just these heads, you know, just these kind of circles going back that we know there's a little crowd there. So he goes back to Mexico. And he said, when I returned to Mexico, everywhere I look, I saw a masterpiece. In the people, in the houses, the marketplaces, I started to paint as easily as I breathed or spoke. My artistic style was born in an instant. So this is an easel painting, but it's a good example of the kind of style that Diego Rivera is going to use. First of all, the color, right? The colors are absolutely beautiful with a limited palette. He's using a very limited palette here. He's using the colors of the Mexican flag on the flower cellar. And then he's using just very simple shapes, not much detail. And then he's infusing this. These are indigenous people. Part of the project of these upcoming murals is to uplift this indigenous group, these groups that have been so disdained by this elite in Mexico. So he's one of the few artists that tries to change people's feelings by using beauty. He doesn't show them in agony. He doesn't show them starving to death. He doesn't show them as filthy. He shows them as beautiful, right? So their feet are clean. Their clothes are clean. They're set in this beautiful, symmetrical composition here. And the man who's a flower seller, he has made a sacred person. He stands like a priest with the women kneeling in front of him. His body forms the shape of a cross. So in a country that is so Catholic as Mexico is, and especially was, people would recognize this, or at least sense it. So is there anything modern about it? He was really worried about this. He had to make things that were easily recognizable, that told a story, but he wanted to be modern. He didn't want to do that old master style. So what is modern about this? Would anybody like to say? The shapes. What about the shapes? Just simple, exactly, just simple. What else? No facial details, just so incredibly simplified. What about the 3D quality? What about the sense of space that you see over here? That you know, we feel like we're looking through a window into another world. Not here. These characters are flattened. This is very much part of modernism, where it almost looks like they've been cut out of paper and just laid on top of each other. So he's figuring out how to combine these things. So the first thing that happened when he got back to Mexico was Jose Vasconcelos was waiting for him. Jose Vasconcelos is kind of one of my heroes. He was the first minister of education after the revolution. And he decided that Mexico had to learn how to read. So he sent thousands and thousands of books out. He sent thousands of teachers out across the countryside to teach people how to read. And he is the one that said, we need great art, and it needs to be understandable by everyone. So the first big project, he needed an artist to do was the Ministry of Public Education, an administrative building. And so he wanted the murals to be painted in here, in that hallway in there. All 3 floors, huge project, 128 panels on 3 floors, 17,000 square feet of fresco murals, if you can imagine. And Diego, he just didn't go straight to Diego. There were many muralists that he had hired, and these are the 3 most famous. We called los tres grandes, the 3 great ones, David Alfaro Siqueiros, Jose Clemente de Orozco, and Diego Rivera. And they all wanted to do that project. But Diego somehow got his foot in the door first and started doing the work, and then he just kind of schmoozed his way until he got to do the entire thing. This is what it looks like today. So you can see this mural program going on back here. These first floors, and by the way, he's really just figuring out that fresco technique. So his earlier work is kind of rough, and then by the time you get up here, it's magnificent. He has just absolutely mastered it. So these first murals, the theme was, this is called the Court of Labor, down below, and the theme was how working people, workers, farmers, laborers, had been completely abused before the revolution, the reality of their horrible conditions. Oh wait, that's a video, we can't get to work. Oh, it did work. I'm not going to show it anyway. So this is one of the first ones he did, entering the mines, men going down into those mines, which looks like the mouth of hell. You know, I mean, this could be a mouth, and look at these arches, look like eyebrows, so you actually have a face. And he's cleverly mimicking the actual architecture, which is arches as well. This man carrying that board, again, a sacred reference to Jesus carrying the cross that everybody would have registered at that time. They're trudging. They really do look like they're going to hell. And almost faceless. You see a tiny bit of a face here, but not much. So this one is kind of a mystery. People aren't sure if he wanted it to look dark and dirty or if he just wasn't very good at doing the murals yet. Leaving the mines. So here this man has come out of the mine and he's being humiliated by these armed guards who are searching him to see if he's stolen any silver. So again, the religious reference, Christ on the cross, is that martyred position that he's standing in. And then you see the others coming out of the mouth of hell down here. The next theme is how things improved for workers after the revolution. So this is called the liberation of the peon. The peons were the working people on these haciendas. Peonage, the Mexican system of peonage, was like in the South, like in the Old South. These farm workers became so in debt to the hacienda workers that they basically became slaves in servitude, trying to pay this off for the rest of their lives. And they were treated really badly. This is one of those wonderful vintage photographs. And so you can see these hacienda workers marching these men out to the field as if they're prisoners, lined up here and watching their every move while the guards, of course, are armed. So you can really see Giotto in this, can't you? His body is in the same position, more or less, as Jesus's was. It looks like he's come down off the cross. And instead of Mary holding him and having sorrow over him, he is being tended to by these revolutionary workers, four revolutionary fighters who have come upon him. They were just routinely punished. This man had been stripped, tied to a post, and whipped, and then left for dead. He doesn't seem to be dead, though. This man is taking the rope off his hands. This man watches in sorrow. And then in the back, just like Giotto, very minimal. All you can see is what? What's going on back there? they set the hacienda on fire. So the revolutionaries have come and made things right. So here's just again to compare to that Giotto. The rural school teacher. This depicts one of these teachers, many teachers who were sent out, no schoolroom, and the people sitting around her are, here's a man, an old man who's been waiting all his life to learn how to read. And Diego Rivera knew that recently over 200 of these school teachers had been murdered out there because the landowners did not want the peons being educated and learning how to read. So he understood that, and so she is being guarded by a revolutionary guard while the other people in the background work. Diego Rivera would often take parts of his murals and turn them into prints or or a painting, an easel painting, and I just loved this one. I think even more than the mural, it gives you a sense of these people, their earnest interest in learning. It's just beautiful. This is a lithograph. And here are actual child laborers from that period in Mexico. No shoes, starting to work very, very young. So the Court of Laborers was a huge feat that Diego, he did a really great job. But then the Court of Fiestas, the next theme, was an absolute, this is where we really start to see his genius. I think it's actually one of the best things he ever did, where we start to see his use of color, his ability to do design. So let's take a, so this is about the joyous part of being Mexico. This is all the festivals that happen with the different ethnic groups around Mexico. Can you guys see this? Are those lights too bright? I can't see it very well from here. Okay. If you get in the middle, there's less glare. Is that right? Okay, I think it is. I think it is. So this is called the Dance of the Deer, which I think is in the south of Mexico in Oaxaca. These are all actual festivals that the indigenous have had for a long time. The Corn Festival. The Day of the Dead. This is in a cemetery at night by candlelight, where they're honoring, we all know what this is, they're honoring their dead on November 2nd. And then the Fiesta of the Dead, which is at the same time during the daytime, where everybody is celebrating. The market, this is my favorite one, because he has used the architecture and let some of the people sit up there on top of it. Now that's another thing that Giotto did. He had some of those women around Mary, you were seeing them from the back, which pulls us in. It makes it seem so much more 3D and so much more realistic. This almost feels like you'd walk through those doors and you'd be in the marketplace. So very busy marketplace. So one of his gifts is that the overall composition is wonderful before you look at the details. So he's got, again, very limited palette. White fabric, the black of hair, rich dark brown skin, and then a lot of this pale straw color that makes up the hats and the crates with just a few splashes of red. He repeats things over and over. Hats here, hats up here. As human beings, we like, in art, we like things that repeat. It establishes an order that is easy for us to grasp. And then, so there's the wonderful composition overall, but then the details just pull you in. I could look at this thing. I actually got to go see this 3 years ago. I could look at this thing for hours. Then the details of everything that's going on in this little market. A woman, on someone's head, there is a big basket of plantains. Back in the background, somebody has come to market with 2 burros. These are the market umbrellas. And every once in a while, I don't know if you can see this from where you are, but every once in a while there's a little face that's looking right at us. On the other side, more hats, these crates with this crisscross pattern that repeats and gives it some texture that's repeated again up in this package up here. And there is Diego himself, shopping, probably buying some food. And this little girl is just staring at him. I'm sure she's never seen anybody so huge in her life. The burning of the Judases. This is an actual, I think they do this in Spain as well, where on the day before Easter, Friday before Easter, maybe Good Friday? I think Good Friday. I think it's Good Friday. They burn in effigy villains. You know, they make these big paper mache group of villains. And so the villains change over time. Like right now it might be, I don't know, cartel members or whoever. But at this time, his villains, this might be a little, his villains are enemies of the revolution. So a capitalist, a priest. Mexico had a lot of trouble with the Catholic Church for a long time. So priests are usually not well liked. And then this is a general from the revolution. There were a lot of generals still hanging around who wanted to go back to the old way, who had been anti-revolution. And that's what he is. He's got his sword pulled. He's shooting his gun. But what's interesting is that on the ground, look at how the people are in disarray. And you think it's because the fires are starting up there. But they're picking up rocks down here in this cobblestone. They are probably surrounded by right-wingers out there that they're going to throw rocks at. A few of them at the preparatory school in Mexico City, the students who were very conservative kept ruining the murals that the artists were painting, and the artists had to start wearing pistols to work, to paint. Tijuana women, honoring that group in the South. I'm just showing you this because of the way they're dressed. This is way south in Oaxaca, the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, very strong, independent-minded women who wear these long skirts and these short tops, and that is who Frida Kahlo is copying in her indigenous dress. And then up on the top floor, it gets more political. My favorite writer about Diego Rivera says there is a warm Diego and there is a cold Diego. And this is what he would call the cold Diego, not because of the colors, which are warm and beautiful, but because of the content, where we went from human beings with human feelings and human lives to typical. He had just been to the Soviet Union. He was a dedicated communist. And so just as in the Soviet Union, the only art was propaganda. It could only be about communist revolution. And that's what he is doing here. It's funny, if you Google Diego Rivera, this is one of the first things that will come up. And I think it's beautiful, but it is definitely cold Diego. We've got Frida, who had just met. He wasn't married to her yet. They're getting ready for armed revolution, handing out arms. They're all wearing the red communist star. And here's the hammer and sickle flying up here. Here is Siqueiros, the artist, who is a real radical communist. So one wonderful thing, if you go there, they're always working on it. This wonderful mural program is so beautifully maintained. So this is the person who was there when I was there. Diego Rivera married Guadalupe Marin before Frida. So this is his second wife now, if you count Angelina. And this is what he said about her. They met when a friend brought her to his studio while he was painting a still life of fruit he'd arranged in a bowl. Years later, Diego remembered a strange and marvelous looking creature, nearly 6 feet tall, appeared. She was black-haired, and her green eyes were so transparent she seemed to be blind. Her extraordinary hands had the beauty of tree roots or eagle talons. he said, Lupe turned to the man who brought her and said, "Is this the great Diego Rivera? To me, he looks horrible." She proceeded to consume all the fruit that Diego was so carefully painting, claiming that she hadn't eaten in 2 days. He loved strong women. Frida was strong too. He really loved strong women. So he married her. Their house was the center for bohemians, for artists. So many American artists were down in Mexico in these days after the revolution, including Edward Weston. He took this picture of her. She was a great cook. Everybody was always at their house. They had 2 children, Ruth and Guadalupe. And he would later marry Frida, not too long after they got a divorce. She divorced Diego because he was having an affair, of course. But when he married Frida, she was wonderful to Frida. Frida was 20 years younger than Diego. She was only 22. Lupe taught her how to cook for him. So Frida kind of took over this life of the bohemian hostess. So this is a picture of the 2 of them together many, many years later. Frida loved Lupe. And this is Diego did some magnificent portraits. This is a portrait he did much later of Lupe. With that, see, she's reflected in a mirror back there, which is kind of an old European trope. But then look at those hands that he talked about. They're big, and they're just absolutely beautiful. You can see her strength. Then he married Frida. As I said, they were the strangest couple. He was huge. She was teeny tiny. He was famous. Nobody knew who in the world she was. He was he was a real radical communist, and actually she was too. But they got married, and they would stay married until Frida died in 1954 at the age of 47. Their marriage was so tumultuous. They both had lots of affairs. Frida had affairs with men and women. But they still deeply loved each other. She told someone once, she had a terrible accident that left her in pain for her entire life, just miserable all the time. And she once told a friend, "I had 2 accidents in my life. The first was when a bus was a bus accident. The second was Diego. He was far worse." They were both communists. Here they are marching in the Communist Party. And of course, their art was completely different. He's doing art for the public. Her art was intensely private. Just one example. Can you see what that is on her? It's a skull. So it's what she's thinking about. It's called Death on My Mind. She was always in danger of dying or becoming seriously ill because of her injuries. And another one, where he wanted to divorce her, and she did cut off all her hair. This is realistic. So just so original. One great thing about Diego, he thought she was a brilliant artist from the day he met her. I couldn't get a print of this, but there was a picture of him watching her paint, and he just looks like a rapt child. He really appreciated that about her and always supported her. Now, I just think it's so interesting. Diego Rivera was such a womanizer, and these women from the United States would visit Mexico, and one of their goals, a lot of them, would be to have a night with Diego Rivera. And he would just succumb to every woman all the time, over and over and over. But look at him. He must have been so incredibly charming. I don't know. And of course, he was famous, so that. But the interesting thing is, he never made himself look good in paintings. He almost made himself look worse. He didn't pull any punches. Look at this. He seemed to kind of get a kick out of how he looked. Frida would call him the sapo rana, the frog toad. And he would often sign, this would be his little signature a lot of the time, this frog. After they'd been married 1 year, 1930, they went to San Francisco where he was commissioned to do murals. The other big muralists went to the United States too. That government money in Mexico had dried up. And the 1930s was a time when Americans were just crazy about Mexico. They knew all about Diego Rivera. He was written up in the press constantly, and he was viewed as, one critic said, he is the savior of the modern world, because the way that he was supporting the peasants, and Americans loved the idea of a simpler form of life, which they imagined was happening in Mexico compared to their hectic urban lives. And then the Depression hit too. So that European modernism did not appeal to Americans during the Depression. They liked someone who was really talking about the people and what was going on. This is when the Works Progress administration started, and a lot of those artists would imitate Diego Rivera. Huge celebrities. Here they are eating out at a restaurant in San Francisco. They've been written up in the newspaper. Look at the way she dresses. This is the style in 1930, but she always looks like this. He painted 3 murals, and in the United States, he's not painting, of course, things about the Mexican Revolution. This is Allegory of California. It's actually in the stock exchange in San Francisco. He's a communist, but he's always kind of, working along with the capitalists. He got kicked out of the Communist Party in Russia and in Mexico for that capitalist behavior. That he had to pay the bills. They didn't have much money, believe it or not. So there's his beautiful Allegory of California. And then he got a huge commission in Detroit at the Institute of Art, the big art museum there, to make a series to decorate the courtyard as you walked into the museum with, it was called Detroit Industry. So up above, on this big wall, he's painted kind of symbolic things about the different industries in Detroit. But what he really, really wanted to do was paint the automotive industry. Remember how he liked to take apart those little trains? He loved machines. And so there are 2 big murals. They both have the similar top, and then the Ford plant down below. So the Ford plant, the largest manufacturing facility in the world by far, and he toured it, every inch of it. It goes on for miles and miles for a month. And they were making the Model V8. That was what was under production right there. Here it is, Henry Ford's famous assembly line. And when he made this mural, the Ford employees were just incredulous that he accurately portrayed miles and miles and miles of machinery in these 2 murals. Everything you see there is, abbreviated, but absolutely accurate. So again, looking at it as a composition, limited palette, very limited, right? He's making those machines, not some dark steel gray. He's making them white with very cool tones. And then, where does he put the warm colors? The workers, exactly, the people. He's got the workers down here in the warm colors. And then this machinery is so incredibly active, but it's beautifully balanced, isn't it? This looks very much like a statue of an Aztec god, which is no accident for him. And then you see these details again. Here's that assembly line, the men building the carriage for the car. Spectators would come and watch. And he loved comic books, so you see Dick Tracy. I think he's got Charlie Chan back there. I don't know who that is. Does anybody else? It looks like a cartoon character. I don't know. This is the other mural he did. So this time he has 2 of these huge machines kind of surrounding the men working down there. And we're seeing, just a second, I'm gonna go back. We're seeing those repeats again. The men lined up all the way across the front. And then this is my favorite, these straining men, where you get this repeat of this diagonal that contrasts so much with the stillness of these monoliths. And these go, this is not flat painting like the one I showed you before. He goes way back into the far distance with details going all the way back there. And these are also, this is the kind of painting he did about the peons working in Mexico. Here are the ones before the revolution, and back here at the same painting he put the Aztecs. I mean, these are men, slaves, basically. These are not slaves. These are men working under their own power, really strong. Let's see, look at the muscles in their arms. So that this is, I used to think, why is he painting, why is a communist painting for the biggest capitalist, one of the biggest capitalist concerns there could possibly be? Well, it's because the way that communists at this time saw forward for masses of poor people was industry. Not farming, not those things, but progress, industry, which would give every single person a job that would be well-paying, and of course the dream that they would own the factories themselves. This is also interesting because these men are not faceless. They're very individuated faces, and they're of different races. He did that on purpose too, which was not actually the case at the Ford plant at all. But again, it was one of his dreams. I love this guy. I mean, he just kind of looks like somebody I know. Then he went to New York, where at MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, they gave him a solo show, a huge solo show, only the second solo show they had ever given, and the first one was Matisse. So that's how important he was in the United States. It broke all records for attendance. People just flocked in to see it. By the way, I forgot to tell you, the Detroit mural, that was what he himself felt was his masterpiece. And you can certainly see why. Then the Rockefellers wanted him to do a mural in Rockefeller Center. It was called the RCA Center then. Brand new, big buildings. They got lots of artists to do lots of things, and they gave Diego Rivera the plum job, which was on the RCA building, to do a mural about how technology was going to benefit man financially and spiritually. So he designs this huge mural. He's painting away. They come and watch him paint every day. They're really happy with it. And then the communist newspaper the communist newspaper printed something about him selling out to the capitalists. So what does he do? He paints Lenin. He paints Lenin into his mural. And of course now the conservative press, I mean, he's just getting heckled back and forth, is saying he's a communist. How can we don't want this mural? And Rockefeller, let's see, who is the younger Rockefeller? No, the one who became governor. Nelson. Rockefeller was a young man at this time, and he politely asked him if he would please paint that out. And Diego didn't. So they tore down the mural. The only reason we have this is that he made he had all his drawings, so he made a replica of it in Mexico City, and it's still there. So now they go back to Mexico. Diego is really depressed. That just broke his heart. And the whole mural thing is kind of drying up, and he is not feeling very happy. Still, this is my favorite picture of the two of them. This is one of the best pictures of Diego I've ever seen. So they settled back in Mexico City. They had a Bauhaus-style house designed by Juan O'Gorman. And it's two buildings with a bridge. This was Diego's part, and this was Frida's part. Of course, Diego gets the bigger one, but Diego had to have permission to come over to Frida's. She was really mad at him for all his philandering. They also spent a lot of time, especially she did, because she was now her frame is just deteriorating at this time, and she has to spend so much time in bed. This is where she grew up. This was her parents' house, and she would end up dying here as well. I don't know if this is going to work. This is just a little silent video of them there. Probably right about this time in their garden. I heard someone just say she's pretty. You see her beauty better in film than in stills and in her paintings, certainly. Yeah, yeah, because that's not what she's talking about when she's painting. There's that mustache. So Diego does get to do a few more murals. I'm just wrapping up here. Huge murals in the National Palace in Mexico City that show the entire history of Mexico, the revolution up here, the Aztecs fighting with the Spaniards, every hero that's ever been known in Mexican history. And in San Francisco, he painted the Pan American Unity mural in 1940, which was about Mexico and the United States coming together. So here are the Mexican history, Mexican arts, American history, not American arts, but just American industry. And look, in the middle, here is this kind of half machine, half Aztec god that looks so much like that machinery in the Ford plant. You can see this in San Francisco. They just moved it into the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and anybody can just walk in for free and see it there. He did beautiful portraits in these last years. He could make a lot of money doing this. This is a rich society lady, looking like a calla lily. A friend of his. And this was his daughter Ruth, that he painted like her mother with a mirror reflecting in the background. He also did, have you ever seen pictures of these paintings of children that, I was thinking, what? This is so strange. He just did this to make money. He could just crank these things out and American tourists would just buy them like hotcakes. So he did hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these as well. Some of them kind of kitschy, like this. So Frida was getting worse and worse, and she died in 1954. Diego was just devastated. He was just sick for months. Here he is following her coffin in the funeral march. He couldn't eat. He lost a lot of weight. They really loved each other deeply, in spite of some appearances. But being Diego, he did get married again for a fourth time, 2 years after she died. He died not too long after that, so this was his art agent. And so he married her and died in 1957. He requested that his ashes be mingled with Frida's at the Casa Azul, but they didn't honor his wish and buried him in the Rotunda of Great Men in Mexico City, where you can see him. So, just in conclusion, why is Diego Rivera considered to be so important in the art, especially in muralism? Well, he took an old art form and renovated it, turned it into something brand new, something that nobody had seen before. At a time when modernism was the form of high art and most people couldn't understand it, he created an art that was very easy to understand, very clear and readable. he supported and uplifted the poor people of Mexico. And he for all time, he showed us these festivals, these wonderful things about Mexican history and culture, which is just there for all of us to see, a gift that will be there for us forever. Thank you. Comments about Diego? Do you like Diego? A lot of people don't like his art. What do you think? I just showed what I think are masterpieces.
I love the art, but I learned long ago to appreciate the art and hold the artist at arm's length.
Did you hear that? Appreciate the art and hold the artist at arm's length. It's so true about so many artists, sadly.
Are there any younger artists following in this style?
I'm sure there are many, many Chicanos are in LA and Texas, influenced by that, the idea of the mural. We'll see a few murals next week. And I can't encourage you enough to come next week for this Chicano art presentation. It's just so interesting, lively, colorful, disturbing a lot of the time. Just wonderful. It's next Friday, same time. Sorry, I ran over.
So I also just wanted to thank Leonardo Diaz-Sacha, who has been here all evening. We asked him to be available to simultaneously translate into Spanish. We didn't have Spanish speakers today, but he stuck around, and I appreciate that very much. So if you would join me in
Thank you.
thanking Leonardo.